Have you ever met someone who seems completely content on their own? No partner, no group chat buzzing, no calendar packed with plans, and yet they're fine. Not just fine, centered, peaceful. Meanwhile, others, surrounded by people, still feel alone, disconnected, empty. What explains this difference? Is it personality, biology, upbringing, or is there something deeper happening inside the brain? In this video, we'll explore the quiet science of solitude and why, for some people, being alone doesn't feel like a loss. It feels like a return. Loneliness isn't the same as being alone. We often use the words alone and lonely as if they mean the same thing. They don't. Being alone is simply a description of your surroundings. There's no one around. You're at home by yourself. You go to the movies alone. You take a walk and no one joins you. That's all it means. Loneliness, on the other hand, is not about the number of people near you. It's about the feeling of connection. Or more precisely, the lack of it. You can be surrounded by a room full of people and still feel deeply isolated. And you can be entirely alone, with no one to talk to, no one texting, no one calling, and yet feel completely at ease. Psychology gives this a name: solitude. Solitude is not negative. It's not the same as social withdrawal or emotional distress. It's a state of being alone without being lonely. Intentional, quiet, restorative. Research has found that people who are comfortable with solitude tend to have stronger self-awareness, greater independence, and, in many cases, higher levels of creativity. Interestingly, when researchers ask, "When do you feel most lonely?" the most common answer isn't "when I'm by myself." It's "when I'm with people, but I still feel like no one really sees me." That tells us something important. Loneliness is emotional, not situational. It's not about how many people are in the room. It's about whether we feel understood, whether we feel connected. So why is it that some people can spend hours, even days, alone and not feel lonely at all, while others feel disconnected, even in the middle of constant company? That question has less to do with social skills and more to do with how the brain works, how personality is shaped, and how we learn to relate to ourselves. The brain works differently for different people. Why do some people enjoy being alone while others find it deeply uncomfortable? The answer begins in the brain. Human beings are social animals. We are wired to seek connection, and our brains reward that connection with chemicals like dopamine. Dopamine is often described as the feel-good neurotransmitter. We get a hit of it when someone smiles at us, when we receive a message, a compliment, a like, a hug. But not everyone's brain responds to social interaction the same way. Some people are more sensitive to stimulation, not just emotionally, but neurologically. This is where the concept of introversion comes in. Introverts are not necessarily shy or antisocial. They simply experience the world differently. Loud environments, large groups, constant interaction, these things can overwhelm them. In fact, studies suggest that introverts process stimuli more deeply and need longer recovery time after social engagement. So for them, being alone is not a void. It's a reset. They're not escaping people. They're managing energy. On the other hand, extroverts often need social stimulation to maintain a sense of well-being. Their brains may require more external input to generate the same levels of dopamine. But brain chemistry isn't the only factor. There's also something called the default mode network, a system in the brain that becomes active when we're not focused on the outside world. When we're daydreaming, reflecting, or letting our minds wander. This network is more active in people who spend more time in solitude. In a way, their minds are constantly engaged, even when they appear to be doing nothing. So while one person might sit alone and feel restless, another might be quietly replaying memories, imagining new possibilities, or analyzing an idea from 5 different angles. The difference isn't about value, it's about wiring. For some, being alone is silence. For others, it's internal dialogue, reflection, creativity. It's a space where thoughts aren't interrupted, where the mind is free to explore without needing anyone else in the room. And that difference in how the brain responds to solitude can shape how we experience loneliness or the lack of it. What do these people do differently? People who don't feel lonely when they're alone, they're not superhuman. They just have different habits. Different ways of relating to themselves. One of the most noticeable things they do is maintain a healthy internal dialogue. They talk to themselves, not out loud necessarily, but mentally. They reflect. They ask questions. They check in with their emotions. Instead of reaching outward for distraction or validation, they look inward, curiously, sometimes even analytically. They don't need someone else to tell them they're okay. They know when they are and when they're not. This isn't about being closed off. It's about being self-aware. They also tend to have personal interests that aren't dependent on social approval. They read, they write, they draw, they cook, they garden. They learn something new just because it fascinates them. In these activities, they find rhythm, structure, satisfaction, and most importantly, presence. There's also emotional regulation at play. People who are comfortable alone often have the ability to notice an emotion without reacting impulsively to it. They feel sadness and sit with it. They feel boredom and observe it. Instead of running from these states, they explore them. They give their feelings names. They trace their patterns, and by doing so, they reduce the grit those feelings have. This kind of internal work isn't visible, but it's powerful. There's another pattern too. They usually live by a clear set of values. That doesn't mean they have everything figured out, but they know what matters to them. They're not chasing someone else's idea of success. They're not comparing their lives to an endless scroll of curated images. They're grounded, and when you're grounded, you don't fall into the same traps of loneliness that come from seeking external confirmation. None of this means they don't enjoy company. It just means they're not afraid of the quiet when that company isn't there. And that distinction between needing others and simply valuing them makes all the difference. Is this something you're born with or something you learn? At this point, a question naturally comes up. Are some people simply born this way? Do they have a built-in resistance to loneliness? Or is it something they've trained themselves to handle? The answer, like most things in psychology, is both. Some people are more naturally inclined towards solitude. They might be more introverted, more sensitive to external stimulation, or simply less reliant on social validation. Their brains might produce enough dopamine without needing constant social input. For them, being alone feels neutral or even pleasant right from the start. But that's not the whole story, because many people who are now comfortable with solitude didn't start out that way. They learned it, or more accurately, they practiced it. Some began during a major life change, moving to a new city, working remotely, going through loss. Others began by choice. Curious to understand themselves better, or simply tired of always needing someone nearby to feel okay. At first, it's uncomfortable. Sitting in silence, doing nothing, letting thoughts surface without reaching for a screen or another voice. But like any skill, it builds with time. The brain adapts, the discomfort fades, and something else takes its place: awareness. In fact, therapists often encourage people dealing with anxiety or low self-worth to spend time alone. Not to isolate, but to reconnect. Not with the world, but with themselves. Simple exercises, like writing a short journal entry, taking a walk without music, or turning off notifications for an hour, can begin to shift how we experience solitude. Not as emptiness, but as space. Not as silence, but as clarity. So yes, some people are naturally more at ease when alone, but far more people can become that way through gentle, consistent practice. And when they do, they're not just avoiding loneliness. They're developing a stronger relationship with the one person who will never leave them: themselves. What can we take away from this? If you often feel lonely when you're alone, you're not doing anything wrong. You're not broken, you're human. Modern life is designed around connection. Notifications, messages, meetings, updates. Everything keeps us engaged with others, but it rarely teaches us how to be engaged with ourselves. That skill, the ability to sit with your thoughts, to understand your emotions, to be at peace with your own presence, isn't instinctive for everyone. It can feel unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable, but it's learnable. You don't need to go off-grid. You don't need to become a monk. You just need small shifts. 5 minutes of journaling in the morning, a walk without headphones, an evening without screens. Asking yourself once in a while, how am I feeling right now, really? What you'll start to notice is that solitude becomes less threatening, less empty. It becomes space, a kind of open ground where thoughts can settle and clarity can form. And as you practice, you may also discover something subtle but powerful. You stop relying on others to make you feel whole. You still value connection. You still enjoy closeness. But you no longer depend on it to define who you are or how you feel. There's a quiet strength in that. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. Because once you've learned to feel at home with yourself, you carry that home with you, wherever you go. Alone doesn't mean lacking. It simply means you're in your own company. And if that company becomes interesting, honest, even kind, then loneliness fades. Not because someone walked in, but because you finally met the person who was there all along. Solitude isn't always easy, but it isn't something to fear. It's not a sign that something's missing. It's not a problem that needs fixing. Sometimes it's just a space where your thoughts can breathe. Your feelings can settle, and you can meet yourself again without noise. Because connection doesn't start with others, it starts with you. And once you've learned to feel whole in your own company, you may find that loneliness no longer chases you, even in the quietest rooms.